Welcome, everybody. Can everybody see my screen? There it is.
I
Should be
can.
loading now. All good? Okay. Welcome to part one of three parts of Ethics and Hilchot Tzedakah. This is a vague title and an intentional title. It is an intentionally vague title, you could say. I want to talk over the next few weeks about how some ethical ideas inform some Hilchot Tzedakah. As I began to take on this topic, I quickly realized it was broad and expansive, and I don't want to, right off the bat, I want to be clear that I'm not purporting to cover, make overstate any claims and cover this entire vast area of Jewish thought, of Jewish law. So I want to start, before we look at any actual halacha, with an example, a modern example outside of halacha, outside of Jewish thought per se, of how ethical thinking, or sort of an engagement with certain ethical maxims and adoption of certain ethical claims can inform a direct call to action, a halacha, if you will, a law, a principle of action, of doing. And I want to look at an example within specifically the context of charitable giving. So let's take a look at this video from the philosopher Peter Singer. It's going to be about 2 minutes long, and then we'll discuss.
I ask you to imagine that one day you're walking across a park, and in this park there's a pond. There is something in the pond splashing around, and when you look closer, you're shocked to see that it's actually a very small child, not a teenager who could stand up, but a child too small to do that. And the child seems to be drowning. You rush down to the pond, but as you do, the thought occurs to you, oh, damn, I've just put on my most expensive shoes and fine clothes because I'm going to this important occasion. And I don't have time to take them off if I'm going to save the child, but they are going to get ruined if I jump into the pond in them. So then perhaps the thought might occur to you, is this child really my responsibility? I didn't put the child in the pond, not my child. I've no idea why the child's in the pond. I could just go on my way to my meeting, and would I have done something wrong? And when I put that to audiences, they unanimously, or at least overwhelmingly, say, yes, that would be wrong. In fact, that would be quite an awful thing to do. You would be only a terrible person could do such a thing. Then I point out that we're really all in this situation, not that we are rescuing children out of ponds, but that for relatively modest amounts of money, we could save the life of a child. Because there are children dying, for example, from malaria, and we know how to save those lives. If rather than save the life, I want to save my money to spend it on some new clothing, then am I any different from the person who walked past the child in the pond? People often do say to me that they'd like to help, but...
All right, so cutting off the rest of the video here just because he starts basically plugging this particular organization. But first of all, just show of either virtual or real hands. Who of the four of you is familiar at all with, or five now, hi everybody. How many people are familiar with Peter Singer or any of his philosophy or work? Okay,
Right now.
Yeah. So he is, the example he gives here of, and by the way, before I continue at all, I just want to recognize that, giving abstract theoretical, having an abstract theoretical discussion that involves children dying is, a choice that was made, but just want to name that. And if that's a sensitive point for anybody, of course, want to be mindful of that. But the continuing, I guess, with this thought process, he gives it, what should be, I think, what he, in his own telling, is a very obvious example to almost everybody who hears it of course, you have to save somebody whose life you could very easily save. Kal v'chomer, a child. even if it means ruining your best suit. That's pretty much a no-brainer. But what's controversial about him, or what's maybe interesting about his philosophy, is how far he takes that reasoning. Is how he says it's not only the case that you have to ruin your clothes in order to save a life of a person who is dying right in front of you, God forbid, but rather that since there are people dying in any given moment in the world, you really shouldn't spend money on anything you don't, strictly speaking, need and rather you should direct that money toward saving those lives. And there's a whole school of thought, which we're going to get into a bit as we go through this example, that deals with how exactly to go about that, how to apply his thought. But I want to look briefly at, I'm trying to move to the next slide here.
You were saying who Peter Singer is.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not. I should thank you. He's a professor.
I ask you to imagine.
Sorry, having a little bit of technical. There we go. He's a professor at Princeton who kind of this paper, I believe, in 1972. Bert, as a political science student, you may know more of the details. So correct me if I'm missing any of this. But this is, as I understand, the article that sort of put him on the map in 1972, Famine, Affluence, and Morality. And here he goes out of his way to say, I don't even need to say much in defense of the refusal to take proximity and distance into account. He means very, very explicitly by this that it doesn't matter in terms of your personal ethical obligation whether a person whose life is in danger is close to you or far to you. We have to save any life we can possibly save, regardless of who they are, regardless of where they are, regardless of what that means we give up in terms of luxuries. So I made this little chart here just to drive home the point even further, that ultimately what is going on for Singer is he's making ethical claims. This is a gross oversimplification. If there are any philosophers in this crowd here, or any students of utilitarianism or effective altruism, please forgive any glossing over the details that I'm doing. But for the sake of brevity, we have one claim that saving lives is good. The more lives, the better. Peter Singer says he believes that. Most of us, I would imagine, would believe that to some degree. Depends how technical you want to get. And then he has another ethical claim, which is more controversial, that says that proximity of those lives that need saving is irrelevant. Those, among others, probably if you're thinking about it more carefully, combine into an ethical mandate. That ethical mandate basically says give away as much of your money as possible, such that you maximize the number of lives that can be saved, or maybe the good that can be done across the world. Ethic, claim into halacha. That is to say, thing we are supposed to do because it's the right thing to do, ethical mandate. And that is going to be, that mandate, as I've worded it here, roughly resembles the school of thought that's called effective altruism, which we will look into a little bit more, but is going to be kind of a foil for what we're talking about today. Any questions so far on what I just sort of breezed through?
When they say proximity, does that mean geographical proximity? Or, I know that, I've heard a shiur in which proximity, for example, in terms of a relative in need as opposed to somebody who's a stranger.
Excellent point. That is, I would define both of those as proximity. I think when Singer uses the term, I imagine he, would apply it that way as well. Certainly for the purposes of today's discussion. And if you notice in the kind of subtitle of today, it's proximity matters. It applies both to geographical, familial, maybe proximity of affiliation, Jews versus non-Jews, for example, proximity of national identity. An American in Thailand and a Thai person in Thailand are both in Thailand. I imagine many Americans are going to feel more proximity with the American, and vice versa. A Thai person in Thailand will feel more proximity with a Thai person in America than they would with an American person in America. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, and thanks for pointing that out when we talk about proximity here. Anybody else? All right, so we can move on. Back to today's title of Ethics and ethics and Hilchot Tzedakah, I want to spend the next few weeks thinking about this question. What ethical claims or considerations might inform the halachot of tzedakah? Notice in my wording here, I'm talking about claims, so kind of firm ethical maxims, and also I wanted to include the word considerations, because when we think about the rationales behind tzedakah, there are firmer and looser principles that are going to be at play. Here is basically an attempt at modeling visually kind of what the previous slide said, what I hope to do here. Of course, there are more than 3 ethical claims that could possibly be made. This is just, for the sake of example. I'd like to engage in the process of thinking about what might fill each of these bubbles. And Hilchot Tzedakah, is that bubble is in a sense already filled. We have the Shulchan Aruch, the sections of the Shulchan Aruch that deal with tzedakah. We have the Mishneh Torah. We have the rest of the poskim since then. But what is going into it exactly? Any thoughts? Let's start by brainstorming. I would love to hear from any and all of you about what principles, and I guess I've given away one, which is proximity, what principles might or might not go into the way we think about Hilchot Tzedakah.
Justice.
Okay, great. If I had a whiteboard, I'd write this down. I'm not tech savvy enough to do it in here, but justice is a good one. Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
How about, the extent of the need? But so his setup was, that you could save people's lives. But how about, other ethical claims on your tzedakah, besides saving lives?
Great. So
in other words, he's
yeah.
He's talking about that. But for example, if your community needs a mikveh,
sure,
okay, and it doesn't have a mikveh, that's not a life and death thing, but it's an important halachic thing, and so you need to, so does that override, giving it to somebody who, it doesn't, may not be, or override somebody giving, a life-saving thing, but it may override somebody, who's giving money to tzedakah for other reasons.
Got it. So what if we said, tell me if I'm getting this right, what if we said maybe needs that don't have to do with physical safety? That the idea that
how about life? It doesn't do life and death issues.
Right. The idea that those are possibly relevant, that those matter,
or as powerful to some extent as life and death issues.
Yeah,
and is it, for example, if your community needs to have a shul or a pool, as it were, and a school, is that a halachic requirement that overrides giving money for mosquito netting?
Yeah, absolutely. Where I was interested in going for now, I'll just say that we're calling effective altruism. We threw out that term earlier to basically talk about trying to maximize the ratio of dollars spent to lives saved, spend as few dollars as possible to save as many lives as possible. I guess, this is a leading question, Bert, you started to address it, but how do people think the halachic system, our need to buy into the halachic system, might mesh with that or not mesh with that? On the one hand, by the way, not to be too leading with it, on the one hand, we are told, saving a life is like saving the whole world. Pikuach nefesh overrides an extraordinary number of mitzvot, virtually every mitzvah, except for a few very, very notable exceptions. We have a clear value for saving lives in Judaism, and yet we give money to shuls, we give money to yeshivas, we give money to build mikvahs, like you said, Bert. We spend money on kosher food, kosher restaurants, maybe even Pesach programs, lo aleinu, but those of you who do enjoy, I'm kidding. But we've been kidding about it, making a serious point, which is that we have decided in our communities that it is okay to spend money certainly on mitzvot ben adam lemakom, mitzvot that don't have to do with necessarily helping other people in need. And that means fewer malaria nets.
So is the principle?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the principle that we're getting at that it's not boundless, that there are, in theory, there might be limits to how much one is obligated?
How much one is obligated in what?
In pursuing tzedakah. Like Singer's argument, I think, is essentially like, people are in need, give all your money until, give any discretionary money you have. And then, if we as a community have decided we're okay spending money on things that are not helping people not meet their basic needs, that there are limits. There are bounds to how much any one person or any one community is expected to do for charity.
Ari, can I add on to that? I think as well, does that mean, for example, that you can't spend money on vacations, because that's frivolous, as opposed to spending it on, on saving people's lives? I'm extending what you said, Ari.
Yeah, absolutely right. So vacations, that's where, like Pesach programs, like you could draw a whole spectrum of kind of need to, and I don't want to kind of try to throw out a whole thesis now before we really looked at the halachot, or some of the halachot. We obviously can't look at it all, but you could draw a whole spectrum from, I don't really need this, but it's pretty important, to I don't need this at all, to actually this is actively bad that I'm buying this, and like no moral person should ever spend their hard-earned money on this type of thing. There's kind of and different things will fall at different points in that, and different things we buy could have different levels of maybe hypothetical justification. My point here is that I'm already kind of, to introduce proximity, the idea that proximity matters, is I'm already skeptical that a pure effective altruist lens, which says proximity doesn't matter, is going to be congruent with the laws of tzedakah. Because as Ari, you're saying, you're talking about limits on tzedakah, Shulchan Aruch, this is not on the source sheet for today, but Shulchan Aruch does talk about, I believe it's a fifth of the income, of one's income, is what it talks about as an upper limit. Now, that's not necessarily practical halacha. You would have to look at more in depth at what modern poskim say about giving. Certainly, there are plenty of people who can afford to give more than the fifth of their income, and I think we'd say it's commendable for them to do so. But there is, regardless of whether we're talking about don't give too much tzedakah so that you can do other mitzvot, certainly just like the Jewish world is not built on an effective altruist model of funnel as many dollars as you can into situations of extreme need. Let's start looking at some of the sources, because I think we are going to see another example, another kind of slightly morbid example that is going to talk about, that is going to speak to some of what we're kind of passing back and forth here. So this is from a lesser known philosopher. One of my rebbeim pointed me to this text. I don't know if any of you were at my pre-mincha shir Erev Purim, but if so, it might look familiar. So this guy, Richard Christian, writes as follows. Suppose you're on your way to a critical and unrepeatable meeting. You expect by this meeting to gain the money to save lives, mathematically calculated to be 100 lives. Considering maybe everything that can possibly go wrong in a process, it is virtually a mathematical certainty that you'll save 100 lives. However, you pass this child who's drowning, God forbid. If you save this child, it's one or the other. They're going to miss the chance to make this pitch. Those lives, at least for now, are not going to be saved. May you stop to save the child. Again, this is an example where I would imagine virtually anybody would say, or certainly the vast majority of people would say, yes, you should stop and save the child. This
Assuming you can swim.
assuming, yeah, it's a shallow pond, small child. You are this is all assumes physical capability and zero risk, basically. Another version of this example that I've heard, by the way, is you have two ponds right next to each other, and in one there's a child who's drowning, and in another there's a Picasso painting that is about to fall under the water and be ruined. And if you saved the Picasso painting, you could sell it and save many, many more lives with the proceeds. And William McAskill, who's one of the main philosophers kind of contemporarily behind effective altruism, was asked this question. He was sort of put on the spot, and he kind of demurred because he said he admitted the pure effective altruist response would be save the Picasso. You're going to save more lives. Similar to the trolley problem, if anyone's, people are familiar with that. But he, I think, then recognized that that was a pretty off-putting stance to have to a lot of people. And I don't want to, caveats, I don't want to misquote. My understanding from what I read about this was that he sort of walked back his point. He said, look, I'm not saying that's what I would do. I think there is this idea that we have kind of visceral human urges to help people who are right in front of us. But, it's certainly a hole in their philosophical thinking, in that movement's thinking. I guess, yeah, first, let me get feedback here before I move on. Any thoughts on this?
Isn't there a halachic principle, involving certainty as opposed to uncertainty?
I
don't remember what it's called. In other words, what I'm saying is, yes, they think that it's probably going to succeed in saving 100 lives, but that doesn't mean it will save 100 lives, as opposed to saving this one person's life, which you'll be able to save.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, we do talk about sfeikot, or the idea of suffix or uncertainty, all the time in halacha, in terms of kind of being a factor that leads to certain practical decisions being made a certain way. I think in this case, we are going to just follow the math under his thinking and say that the likelihood of those 100 lives being saved is as certain as the likelihood of you not having a heart attack in the middle of saving the child from the pond. Like, there's always an infinitesimally small risk, and we're sort of assuming those balance each other out. Again, apologies for all the morbid sort of examples here. It's, for illustrative purposes. Yeah, anyone else?
I think we make this decision a lot in society without maybe it being explicit. Let's say when we talk about how much money the healthcare system spends on any one person, because of distributive justice, right? Like the notion that you could drop billions and billions of dollars on any one person to try to save their life, and they're in front of you. But if you do that, you then take away from lots of other people's healthcare. I think we do this already. It's not as explicit.
Yeah. We do. We certainly do. I think that's kind of Peter Singer's point, is that we're making that decision. I guess what you're getting to is sort of the angle that makes me more sympathetic. I've now kind of spoken pretty negatively about effective altruism and about Singer, but I guess on the other hand, it does get you thinking about all the ways in which we make these decisions without necessarily even realizing it, through the passive kind of systems we invest in and we buy into that do just pick winners and losers in terms of whose life gets to be saved and whose doesn't. What I think I want to try to bring us to from here, from Richard Christian, is what are the limits to this logic? So his example is, I would imagine pretty obvious to most of us. Or you gotta, like, maybe not to everybody, but you gotta save. I think a lot of people are going to say you gotta save this child. Their life is in danger. But what are the limits? What if it's not a drowning child, but rather a person screaming in excruciating pain who just broke their leg really badly? And you could help this person who's not going to die, but they're in so much pain, or you could save the 100 lives. okay, maybe then it's a tougher decision. What if it's your own child? So Bert is back to your different ideas of proximity you talked about earlier, who's perfectly safe, but could really use some financial help due to circumstances totally beyond their control. What if it's somebody asking for money on a street corner, who maybe you pass them every day? Maybe you are visibly, well, I guess that's, introducing another point, which is maybe more self-interested. And maybe you're visibly from Jew and you want to make a Kiddush Hashem in terms of giving them money as well. Although, more of a tangential point. But how far can you extend this logic of kind of removing pure rationality from the decision-making process and thinking about the kind of subjective needs and the passions involved in wanting to help the person in front of you? So of the examples I dropped in, we're going to talk about two in the next half hour. One of them is we're going to look at a couple of sources about giving money to beggars, which is kind of the case study Richard Christian is talking about. And then also want to talk about family obligations a bit in terms of how they come up in the Mishneh Torah and in the Shulchan Aruch. So at this point, I am tired of hearing my own voice. I would love if somebody else could read in English, and people should feel free to follow along in the Hebrew, this halacha from Rambam, from the Mishneh Torah. Feel free to just unmute yourself and start reading or raise a hand.
I guess I could do it. You want English or Hebrew?
English, please. People can follow along in Hebrew if they'd like.
Okay. Anyone who sees a poor person begging and turns his eyes away from him and does not give him tzedakah transgresses a negative commandment. As Devarim 15:2 states, do not harden your heart or close your hand against your brother, the poor person.
Okay. Reactions to this halacha, anyone? Anything surprising here? Interesting? We like it, we don't like it, or we find it easier, less easy?
Well, I don't remember what it is because I remember I learned it. Does achicha mean that it's a Jewish person, as opposed to a non-Jew? Let's say it's a non-Jewish person who's screaming, who's doing it, I don't know how you necessarily know. He has a cross on his, as he's begging. So you assume he's a Catholic or a Christian of some kind. So he's not Jewish. Does that have the same degree of obligation as it would if it's a person, collecting money for, a Jewish charity?
That is a great question. I made a note to see what the poskim have to say about that, and I will get back to you on that one. It is certainly an interesting question, certainly historically going to be relevant. I suspect I would be surprised if the poskim had not interpreted this to mean only a Yisrael, only a member of the Jewish people. However, interesting question as that is, there's something else in this halacha that's really interesting to me. I want to see if anybody else is kind of going to seize on that as well.
I'm interested by the pasuk that's quoted when it talks about your heart. It's almost like it's invoking some kind of impact on the person who's turning away the other person. Maybe it's bringing up not just some kind of objective morality, but like think about what this will do to you if you turn them away.
Yes, that is definitely a nice observation. I had not noticed that before. I'm also noticing something else as you point that out, which is that there's a bit of a mistranslation here, which I will blame on Safaria, but also on myself for not catching, which is that it says, do not harden your heart or close your hand, but the Hebrew is veh. So I think it would be better to translate it as do not harden your heart and do not close your hand, which is relevant to me, I guess, because of what to me is the most striking feature of this halacha, which is that it doesn't simply say if you see a poor person begging, you don't give them tzedakah, that's an avera. It says, if you see them begging and turn your eyes away and don't give them tzedakah, that's an avera. And I think that speaks, Ari, to the idea that it's not really just about do you give, do you not give, but it is, as you're saying, about what's it doing to you, and maybe also what's it doing to them in terms of your heart being hardened and you kind of ignoring this person in your midst. And this is corroborated by the Shulchan Aruch, this understanding of the kind of literal and or metaphorical eye contact element being extremely important. Is someone else interested in reading this next one in English? Okay, if nobody else can do it, that's fine. I'll go ahead and do it. It is a positive biblical command. It's a mitzvah aseh to give tzedakah according to one's means. There are numerous positive commands as to tzedakah and also a negative commandment, not to close one's eyes to charity. Not to, the Hebrew is le'ha'alim einayim, v'ma'alim einav, one who is who averts their eyes, closes their eyes to giving tzedakah, as written in a pasuk, the same pasuk we saw in the Mishnah Torah from Dvarim. Shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand from your brother, the poor person, from your poor brother. And one who does so is called Bilial, wicked. It's not good. It is actually there, kind of to your previous point, Ari, is speaking about there is something cruel specifically about the act of closing of the person closing their eyes or averting their eyes and not looking at what's happening to this person, looking at the injustice or looking at least the need that is before them in this moment. So does this mean what do we think?
It's interesting in terms of the translation. I'm looking at the Hebrew is litain tzedakah kafi hashagas yodo, which is not translated at all.
According to one's means.
Yeah. Oh, according to one's means. All right, fine. Okay.
Yeah. Right. That's, there's more to say about that one. And we'll return to these halachot as well as some others likely over the next few weeks, because we're going to talk about different angles. The according to one's means, there's definitely what to say there. But here, just I want to highlight the idea that we have a lot going on when it comes to the encounter with the person who is in need. You, the person with the potential to give or the theoretical potential to give, are in the midst of an encounter right now. Let me just actually pause and kind of, with the promise of giving, of course, zero judgment, and also without any pressure to share if you don't feel comfortable, I would love a quick poll of who do you generally try to give money to people on the street? Do you generally try to give food? Do you generally give nothing? What are people's practices here?
I generally don't give, but I'm not proud of that.
Interesting. Okay.
The other question is, I frequently give, or I sometimes give, but one of the things that sort of makes me hesitate from giving, is many of the people, it depends where it is that you're doing it. I used to work near a drug clinic, and my best guess in some instances was that they were going to take my money and use it to buy drugs.
Mhm.
And I don't know that I want to subsidize somebody who's using it to buy drugs. So that was, that happens.
Yeah, that definitely understand that reasoning and have,
But as I say, I don't always give either, so I'm not necessarily proud of it. But I sort of rationalize I give tzedakah otherwise. So I don't necessarily. I'm exempt to some extent, because of that. I know I'm not, but
There are no character judgments being made here. People have very valid reasons for taking a whole different slew of approaches to this question that shows up so often in our lives.
I also think if you live in New York City, or depending on where you travel in New York City, I mean it could it could get out of hand unless you're Peter Singer.
Yeah, yeah. That's true. You got to have maybe if you walk around with nickels and dimes, but certainly there's a lot of people who need money, and giving them all money is expensive. I asked that, I think, both to get a sense of where does this discussion, where do these halachot land in terms of how we think about our daily lives, and also just to emphasize that I don't really think this question, I would never ask people, do you keep a given mitzvah, yes or no, and put people on the spot to answer that in front of a group. What I mean to get at here is that there isn't really a right answer. The right answer here is to be a mensch, and that gets to the final halacha, is to say that if the poor person in need, asks you for money, you should not scold them, raise your voice to them, but rather speak gently and show them in some way your goodwill and your good faith. And this can mean different things. I certainly am not about to get on my high horse and say that every time I see a person on the street asking for money, that I say them, hello, sir, what's your name? I am so sorry I can't help you. I'd love to help you. We're not all Rabbi Weiss. We can't all, be at that level. But what I have taken from this, and what I try to do, and what I hope I can, inspire, help inspire you all to do through learning this, is to figure out, when possible, when you feel like it's safe, when you feel like you have the ability to do so at all, what's something you can do, what's something we all can do to express our goodness of heart, our, how does he say it? To show them our libo hatov, our good hearts, and that we wish well, that we wish the people who are in need well. I think that's something that we all absolutely can take something away from, understanding that it may not look the same for everyone. And I think that is quite clear from this particular halacha. That's really a much more important mandate than do you give, do you not give, and certainly than how much do you give. Any thoughts on that?
So the focus here then is less on helping the person per se, but you don't want to shame him or embarrass him, is what seems to be more critical here. In other words, it's the interpersonal reaction, that you shouldn't shame a person or make him feel bad, as opposed to necessarily giving the money. I mean, you can give him the money, but if you can. But the idea is, if you don't, you're sort of, in a way, being, shvichas damim by embarrassing him.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you bring in shvichas damim, this spilling of blood or killing somebody, kind of, because we actually do talk about that. There's a little bit of a spoiler for next week. We do use that term. We talk about cases of urgent need and kind of triaging and prioritizing who needs the money the most, who needs the tzedakah the most. And it's very interesting you're bringing that in as well, because we do say that embarrassing people or shaming them is metaphorically akin to shvichas damim, to murder, to bloodshed. So thanks for bringing that in. So we talked about giving money. Do any of you feel differently about giving food to people who are in need? Obviously, we don't necessarily always have food on us, but I know that some people's practice to, not to give out money because of concerns, like Bert said, about what, you have less of a sort of sense, you have less certainty that it's going to help the person who's receiving it. But any thoughts on, the practice of giving food to people who ask for it directly?
Or person maybe needs something besides food.
Right.
He may need shelter, he may need clothing, he may need, he may need to go to see the doctor. So this is, giving him food is one thing, but he may have other needs.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is on my mind as well. When I think about that, it's possible people won't like certain food. So obviously there's there's allergies, there's dietary restrictions, there are religious dietary restrictions, and there also is just the sense of it's not exactly meeting the person in terms of where their greatest need is, even if it is preventing them from doing something that may be actively harmful. So I appreciate that. Look, there are many ways to think of this. Just this afternoon, I walked past somebody with a sign asking for food. I didn't have any cash that I could give him, or asking for money, excuse me, not food. And like I said, this is a work in progress for me too, in terms of how I apply this in my life. But I was in a rush, I was distracted by something else, and I kind of tried to smile at this man. I don't even know if it came out as a smile. I just sort of looked at him and like tried to not be totally averting my eyes. And he said, like, that's okay. You have a blessed day. And not presenting that as any sort of like brag. It's not, I didn't do much at all. I didn't know if I even realized I was doing anything. But it really just I share that anecdote only to drive home how powerful it can be to show the remotest amount of attention or presence or compassion to people who have found themselves through whatever chain of events, through whatever causes in the position of begging. Any last thoughts on this kind of whole matter? Okay, let's move on then to a point that Bert alluded to earlier, which is our final kind of area of discussion for today, which is about family. So we see from the Shulchan Aruch, from a few simanim later, a few sections later, from the halacha we saw earlier, is that is actually an obligation to help one's grown children financially. Actually, there's more in that than here. So someone else want to read through it?
Want me to?
Yeah, go for it. That's fine. I recognize that people have other things going on in the background.
Helping one's grown-up sons or daughters in need when he is not obliged to. This comes under the general head of tzedakah. In fact, such tzedakah is to be preferred to other forms. Not only a father or child, but any relative should be given preference to a stranger. The poor of his own house to the poor of the city at large, the poor of his own city to the poor of other cities, and the poor that dwells in Eretz Israel, those who dwell in other lands.
So they're really concentric.
Rabbi Linzer used to, I think, at one point did some concentric circles on a map, of the innermost circle is this, and the outermost circle is that. I remember him doing something like that.
Really? Was that about this topic, about tzedakah?
Yeah. In other words, it's sort of circles or something like that. I don't remember what it was. I have to speak to him anyway, so I'll ask him about that.
Or Baruch Shekivanti, I'll ask him as well. But that is,
Strangely enough, you should just know. I lead a halacha class on Mondays at 11 o'clock, and he was going to be our guest lecturer for the next 3 Mondays. And we had agreed that he was going to do tzedakah. And we thought to some extent that you might be covering some of the same ground, and that therefore it makes sense to do something else. So we arranged, and I've started, and I've asked the Bayit to publicize it to do something else. So it's not quite the same topics that he does.
Wow. Well, look, I'm sure I imagine he has the ability to cover things that I won't cover and to go to a level that I won't be going to. But nonetheless, that sounds really interesting. And I'm sure whatever he does go into will be great. The Yeah, the concentric circles here I found fascinating. I find it honestly, I find this halacha arguably troubling. I mean, look, I don't have children of my own, let alone grown children. But the idea that they one's family who's not necessarily poor, not necessarily in any sort of dire financial need, takes priority over those who are extremely poor is on the one hand kind of tough to internalize. On the other hand, my parents paid the vast majority of me going to college. That wasn't an absolute necessity. I could have, figured out a way to pay my own way, loans, in-state tuition, etc. They paid for that. They could have given all that money to poor people, and they didn't. So maybe this is more natural than I gave it credit for, when first coming across it. But there's a lot to think about here, I think, in this one. In terms of how these concentric circles work. This is our last slide. I have a concluding video to share, but I want to just give anybody, again, recognizing that people have, busy evenings going on. If anybody wants a chance to weigh in before we conclude.
So this is not the proximity. In other words, this seems to be speaking against proximity to some extent.
How so?
Because what you're saying is, you're as opposed to a stranger in the community, your people come before. Maybe the stranger is more needy, so you might need to give it. It might theoretically need to give it to to me, the more needy person should be getting it, and I think that violates, the proximity, the anti-proximity factor that Singer is talking about.
My understanding of this was that family relationship is a form of proximity. And then even outside the family, your, poor people who are under your household's employ take priority over poor people who are outside it, take priority over those who live in other cities. So that there is a proximity factor. It's just a different understanding of proximity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Saying, the person who begs on the corner outside my apartment is proximate to me, but not as proximate as my wife. And if I know my wife needs $1, I'm going to give it to her before him. I mean, it's a silly example because we're married, but you get what I'm getting at. If I had my imaginary adult child, I think what the idea of family taking priority and the idea of the poor who are close to you or who are physically in front of you taking priority, what these add up to is just a conception of society, a conception of we live in a society that is ordered around certain things where this is just what we do for each other because it feels so wrong to do it differently. I think the halacha gets that and is speaking to that. As much as it might in theory, like totally in theory, make sense not to pay for private college for your kids and to give that money to the poor instead, they can get a perfectly good in-state education. People do it, and we get that. We all get that, and we all understand that is just something that would feel wrong in in our society to deprive our children of. Maybe some people will disagree, and you could certainly push back on that. But I think I'm speaking for a wide swath of people who share that view. So too with, and I recognize not everybody does give money to people begging, and there are many good reasons for that. But for me, it's hard to say, I'm not going to give you this $1 because it would be more effective given to purchase a malaria net because you're right here and you need it. You're telling me you need it. Caveats about scammers, etc., totally aside, and understanding how that can play a role. So I feel, and I think many others feels that is important as well. And I think the halacha feels as though, even if you're not going to give that money, at a minimum, you have to understand that we live in a society together with these people, and that we have to behave appropriately toward them. We have to show them love. We have to show them respect, even if that's in a very, very minimal sense, even if that's just like a slight smile and slight eye contact. And ultimately, nobody says it better than George Costanza. So we will close with the following Musar clip.
Excuse me, I was waiting.
Where? I didn't see you.
I've been standing here for the last 10 minutes.
I won't be long.
That's not the point. The point is, I was here first.
Well, if you were here first, you'd be holding the phone.
You know, we're living in a society. We're supposed to act in a civilized way. Does she care? Does anyone ever display the slightest sensitivity over the problems of a fellow individual? No, no. A resounding no.
Hey, sorry I took so long.
Oh, that's okay, really. Don't worry.
All right. So I love Seinfeld. I love that clip. And I hope
Screaming at the person, is not particularly ethical either.
right. I mean, the irony is that George and all the main characters of Seinfeld
Right.
are themselves terrible people.
Right.
But there's something behind all the shtick and all the situational comedy. There is, I think, a real message to be had there, which is that guy was really nice at the end. He took too long on the phone. George was waiting for him forever. The woman who took it afterwards, who cut him in line, was being nasty, and the guy said sorry, and the guy looked him in the eye and smiled. And whether or not George, being the curmudgeon he is, actually did feel any better after that, I think most of us would feel better after that interaction. I certainly would.
I thought he was upset with the woman.
He's upset. This is context to the whole episode. He was first, the guy was on the phone forever and he got distracted with something else, and the guy finished his call, and
The woman comes in.
before him and wasn't being nice about it. So in any event, I think there is a kernel of unironic truth in that bit of comedy. Any last thoughts before we are just about done with our hour here?
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Those who are I didn't get to speak to, I am saying hi right now. It's nice to meet those of you who I have not met yet. And Tiferet, good to see you. And I look forward to hopefully seeing as many of you as are able to make it in a week, same time next Wednesday. We'll be talking about urgent need.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Have a good evening, everyone.